Now, this is a scheme that provides both great opportunity but also great headaches for millions of businesses.
Absolutely. So we're finishing phase 3 of ESOS effectively now. You then, by 5th of December of this year, 2024, also have to submit an ESOS action plan. So it's bringing a degree of accountability to ESOS for the first time, which, in my opinion, is a really good thing.
Exploring things is probably the biggest failure we're doing at the moment, is that we're looking into stuff and we're discussing stuff and we're considering stuff, but there are so many things that you could just do that will make a difference and make this next task maybe a little bit less daunting.
Hi, and welcome to the True Zero podcast. My name is Rob Gorby, and today we're tackling the subject of ESOS, the Energy Savings Opportunity Scheme. Now, this is a scheme that provides both great opportunity but also great headaches for millions of businesses. So, delighted to say that I'm joined by two excellent experts in their field. John Tarbet, Head of Carbon Management Services at Planetmark, a carbon consultancy. And we're also joined by Otto Terrell, Head of Sustainability for True, a platform that enables businesses to deliver commercially viable sustainability strategies. Welcome. Thanks for joining us, guys.
Morning, Rob.
Morning.
John, would like to start with you first. ESOS, what is it, and what are the key timings that businesses need to be aware of?
ESOS is essentially the UK's interpretation of an EU directive around energy efficiency for large organisations. By large organisations, having more than 250 employees at certain critical dates and or certain financial metrics that deem them to be of a certain size. It's essentially there to assess the overall energy consumption for that organisation across their operations, essentially scope 1 and 2, across buildings, manufacturing, transport, etc. And then to help identify all savings opportunities, any energy efficiency gains that can be getting, but put financial costings, ROIs, and some sort of detail around that to provide a real commercial roadmap for those organisations so they can understand where do the opportunities lie, what's the direction of travel, and let them start to making some informed decisions from there.
Okay, so it's been around a while, but there's something different about this particular phase, isn't there, in terms of the compliance and action plans? Can you elaborate a little bit on what's needed there?
Absolutely. So we're finishing phase 3 of ESOS effectively now. The first phase completed in December 15. Second phase was December 2019. The third phase should have completed December 23, but due to revised guidelines being put through Parliament, slight delays, that's been extended to the 5th of June, which is obviously just gone, and there's a mini extension through to the 6th of August currently, which a lot of firms are still working to. One of the key differences, as you rightly say, is following your ESOS submission, you then by 5th of December of this year, 2024, also have to submit an ESOS action plan. What that's essentially there to do is, as an organisation, you have to set out and submit to the EA details of all the measures between now and phase 4 compliance submission, which will be December 27, all the measures which you intend to implement across the business. And going into some detail, you have to say what those measures are, when they're going to be implemented, anticipated energy savings across that piece within the next few years as well. There are then 2 annual progress reports, December 25 and December 26, which is measuring and recording your progress against that action plan. So it's bringing a degree of accountability to ESOS for the first time, which, in my opinion, is a really good thing. Previously, phase 1 and 2 was largely a compliance exercise, a tick box exercise for most organisations. But this time, by having to put forward an action plan, I think it's going to bring a lot of accountability to many of the organisations in scope.
Yeah, agreed. It's good. It's a good point. But in terms of the action plans, what are the implications of not actually delivering an action plan or not submitting an action plan?
From a legal perspective, fairly minimal at this stage. If you can submit a 0 action plan. And for some firms that might be perfectly legitimate. If they know they intend to move offices in that next few year period, if they've done all the things that are within their operational control, which to be fair is rare, there's generally always something you can do, but there may be valid reasons why within the next 4 years there is nothing that they intend to do around energy efficiency. There might be longer term projects that they're working on, or major capex projects that are pushed out due to budget or logistical constraints. What we're saying to our clients is you want those action plans to be realistic. You don't want to put in everything that you think you may put in. It's got to be a realistic plan. You don't want to try and greenwash. You don't want an annual progress report to demonstrate that you actually haven't delivered anything. But equally, in those progress reports, if in that intervening period you have implemented some more measures or you intend to, that's the time to add those into the equation as well. So it has to be authentic. It has to, it has to come with a degree of integrity to demonstrate what you're actually going to do.
Excellent. I mean, although we've seen like a lot of businesses who are just leaving millions of pounds of opportunity on the table, also tons of carbon on the table where they're not actually implementing the findings from ESOS. So it can only be a good thing if the action plan is there to actually stimulate action.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that we've seen from previous ESOS rounds that there are savings to be had, and when we're looking at things like Scope 1 and 2, it is that rare situation where we can see cost and carbon savings being found and unlocked. So ESOS represents a really nice starting point for businesses to look at, but through a number of reasons that I'm sure we'll cover today, businesses sometimes find this all a bit daunting and maybe end up not really doing anything about it. So hopefully this action plan is going to really start to give them the light push they need to start to actually see these actions and see the benefits that will come from it.
And I guess it's not just about the money or the carbon, but it's also about building momentum and committing to sustainability in the longer term. So there's other benefits rather than just seeing this as the kind of the pounds or the tons of carbon. There's a kind of a momentum story here as well. Isn't that right?
Absolutely, yeah. It's the starting point for a very long journey for a lot of businesses. I think when we all look at a blank piece of paper, it can be quite a daunting exercise to think, how are we going to do this? How are we going to model all of these near and long-term initiatives, but also the costs associated with deploying those initiatives. So hopefully we are starting to see a development in how we approach modeling these scenarios, how we approach building out these strategies so that we can actually build something that is commercially competitive and isn't going to wipe businesses out, because we do find ourselves in positions where I've had a lot of conversations with companies who are nervous about putting themselves at a disadvantage by being the first to act, and what that means is everybody's waiting for somebody else to do something. So if we can start to show the economic benefits of it, but also show that this is something that we all need to be embarking on for the future of the planet, hopefully we can start to share ideas and collaboratively come to this kind of global solution, really.
Yeah. And John, I guess as an ESOS assessor, it must be music to your ears in terms of businesses now having to take action, because I can imagine it's quite frustrating when you put a lot of effort into creating ESOS reports, identifying opportunities, and then they just sit on a SharePoint or in a cupboard somewhere and they're just not implemented. So I imagine from your perspective, wanting to see action, that's a good thing.
It is, definitely. And I think what we've also seen since ESOS phase 2, 2019, pre-COVID, pre-major energy spikes, is the conversations with a lot of those same clients this time around is, I wish we'd implemented some of those measures, John. The payback wouldn't have been 7 years. It would have been 3. It would have paid for itself now. We wouldn't have had some of the major sort of operational cost spikes that we've experienced in the last few years. So in many ways, the energy spike, which obviously has caused a lot of problems for a lot of organizations and on an individual level, the silver lining from that has highlighted to businesses just where energy prices can go.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think knowing they can go there once, they can go there again, they can go beyond. And yes, they've settled down, albeit not to sort of spike levels, but it does highlight to businesses that they need to get on and start implementing some of these energy efficiency measures. I've personally always taken a commercial approach to sustainability, because I know, as does Otto, to get stuff done with the major corporations, you've got to provide a business case for doing anything.
Yeah.
And so part of the job and our role and our collective roles and with the True platform and action plans is providing that robust commercial business case to clients and helping them navigate it and also communicate it, I think, internally. So it's great this time around that there is a drive, that it's not just looking at the report thinking that's great, see you again in 4 years' time. It's got a bit of momentum itself, ESOS, and I think those regular touch points with the annual progress reports are only going to be a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. There's also a kind of a way of thinking that we're having to teach at the moment, which is many businesses are looking at kind of their short-term revenue and how their business is going to grow in the near term, but we're looking at kind of timelines up to about 5 years in advance. And it's that trying to build an understanding, and to use things like solar for an example, your standard lifetime on solar panels is 25 years. So as much as a 4-year payback on an initiative may seem like a long time when you look at it from comparing against other initiatives and investments you're making within your business. To John's point, if somebody had deployed solar PV in their last round of ESOS, the chances are they'd have paid it off by now and then have a further 20 years of free energy coming through into the business. So wouldn't have fallen victim to a lot of the price hikes that we've seen in the past years. And it's just understanding that way of thinking, that these things are investing in the future of your business, even if that does mean there's a capital outlay in the short term. And we are seeing a lot of new businesses popping up with offering really beneficial kind of financial incentives and also support by way of finance leases, asset finance options to help businesses fund these projects, but also things like PPAs, so offsetting those initial capital outlays so that you can kind of invest in the long term of these initiatives. So it's always about thinking about how these things can work into the business and working with the budgets that you have available.
You allude to some of the challenges faced there in kind of getting ESOS off the ground, or just sustainability more generally. And actually on that point then, what are some of the kind of key challenges that you see businesses facing that prevents them from implementing these programs? Because we need to understand what those challenges are to then enable business to overcome those specific challenges. What are some of the things you found from your experience, John, on
I think one of the key things is almost a fear of getting started, or fear of going down the wrong path. There's been various technologies over the years where, buy cheap, buy twice. It's bitten estates directors, facilities directors, perhaps looking at the wrong type of technology, or the right technology, but in the wrong order. And I think that's one of the key discussions that's even more prevalent for phase 3. It's not looking at necessarily individual technologies, as many of the conversations Otto and I have had with mutual clients. It's looking at the combination of technologies, but deploying them in the correct order as well.
Right.
So I think for a lot of clients, it's wanting that support. So okay, you've identified within this ESOS report that we should look at A, B, and C. Where do I go? And it's about then potentially signposting to suitable technology partners that have got integrity, are going to supply good product at a good price and have good support, because that's critical. But also helping them identify, saying that you're considering this tech, perhaps solar PV, you're concerned about the return on investment, but you're also telling me in the same breath that you need to consider some EV charging within the next 2 years. This has a bearing upon all the other conversations. So the ESOS reports for me now are far more strategic than perhaps just individual line items, as they were certainly in phase 1 for many organizations. And I think cost, yes, in many cases a barrier, but I would also caveat that and say all the organizations I've worked with over the years, and my background many years ago was in asset finance as well, is if there's a sound business case, they can generally find the money, either internally or externally. But also it's great, the more complex PPA arrangements for clients, just bringing choice and options to them, that helps. But it's often about helping our stakeholder that we're engaging with do the upsell internally, and they want the confidence to be able to say, these are the 3 things that we should do in this order. So I think it's fear of making the wrong decisions, cost stroke budget, but knowing then how to tap into suitable, funding options, whether that's internally or externally, and finding good tech partners. For me, those are probably the key things that we see.
Yeah, interesting. And Otto, what about like some of the other internal challenges in addition to those then, in terms of resourcing or ownership that we come across quite a bit? So, who owns this? Who's responsible and accountable for it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that to touch on John's point about kind of looking at A, B, and C and hitting it in the right order, there is a distinct lack of knowledge within the space within businesses, and many businesses have been tasked with this new kind of mammoth feat, and somebody whose job had nothing to do with sustainability previously is now in essence the head of sustainability at a company, and they're having to learn and become carbon literate whilst also actioning it, but also having no budget to deal with it. So they're being given an impossible task, really, because as somebody who does this every day, it's already not easy. So having to learn about how this industry works, but then also implement it with no budget, they're fighting a losing battle. And what we found as well is a lot of the more proactive businesses, unfortunately, have been stung by their own knowledge gap, because they have been kind of schmoozed into investing in a project by somebody who has potentially sold them a not such a high quality product. So we are meeting them and starting to look at, these are all the things we think you should do, but they're already averse to actually making these investments because they've already seen some of the things that could go wrong by it. So I'm encouraging businesses as much as possible to skill up, and it's not about becoming an energy consultant. It's about just understanding what the field is. We are in a really great position at the moment in the world where there is so much content available online. There are webinars absolutely everywhere where you can learn about these things from an introductory perspective, but also down to things like following similar businesses on LinkedIn who maybe are more advanced within their sustainability journey, and see what they're looking at and start asking questions and speaking to consultants where you can. A lot of consultants will offer support without it having to be something that incurs cost. We're all willing to help. We're all fighting the same cause here. So it's about not dealing with these things in isolation, but then also mapping out everything that you're looking at potentially doing. The cost of some of these investments can be quite daunting and can be very high, but if you know before you make that first investment what the whole strategy is going to roughly look like, then you can kind of recompense that a lot better, and you can get that investment a lot easier because you're showing the full strategy rather than, here's this huge thing, I don't know what's coming next.
I think if I can just add to that second, really valid points, and completely agree, Otto. I think from our perspective at Planet Mark as well, the collaboration of firms, sometimes often in the same space, but also sometimes pulling them together from different sectors. As you say, they've all got the same challenges, but identifying that perhaps member A over here has solved a problem and used a particular type of technology or combination, and introducing them to someone that could be from a completely diverse sector. That's fantastic as well, to bring that knowledge to bear, and get people in a room physically or metaphorically and say, guys, I think you should all have a conversation. There's some things that we've seen work really well over here that could just support your journey as well. And secondly, I think coming at it as we do at Planet Mark, as at True, as being technology agnostic to support the clients, because as a client it's over, well, you can go out and get some great supplier quotations individually, but those suppliers ultimately still want to sell you their technology, their solution, their piece of kit. I view very much our role as sitting client side to zoom out a little bit, to really take a look at everything. As Otto says, get everything out on the table and identify which ones are going to make the most sense, which ones you should implement in the near term, mid-term, long term, and understand the strategy of the operation of that organisation as well. What's the remaining length of your tenancy in that building? Are you going to get the payback within your likely tenancy? Are you looking to acquire a new building? And again, whilst that's not strictly ESOS, it's giving guidance as to what they need to look for as well, and look at learnings from, you're about to implement this in your existing stock, but make sure you're designing it in from the outset and not having to look at a retrofit scenario for your new buildings.
Yeah, absolutely. I think also looking at that strategy in stage one and all of the things that are coming into it, it's amazing how many businesses I speak to, who businesses in general always have budgets, and you're always budgeting for everything, and you're always working to, this won't fall into this year's budget, but it could fall into next year's budget. But it's very rare to actually find a business who have a budget for sustainability. And what we find is, if you don't have that budget for sustainability, us as consultants can't work within it, and you as a business don't know what you're working towards. So I really urge businesses, even if that budget is next to nothing, to just set one so that you have something you're working within. And it's a lot easier to then get that authorized, and then we can just do whatever works within that budget, than to go in with nothing and we will throw everything at you and say, these are all the things to get you to net zero, and then both scare you, but then also probably not get that budget from any investors or powers that be and stakeholders. So really kind of understanding, how much am I going to commit to this year, and how much is that going to cost me, and how much do I have available, will give you a template to work towards. And hopefully with this ESOS action plan that we're starting to build out, and especially what we're doing with True and how we are tying the financial side to your sustainability strategy, hopefully that will allow businesses to start to get a better understanding of the cost of net zero and how much we need to make this happen.
Is there not an issue here where businesses do see sustainability more generally, not just ESOS, but sustainability as a cost, and they're missing the opportunity to see the commercial benefit of actually having an effective sustainability strategy, because it's going to creep up in terms of, the consumer pressures there, the supplier pressures there, the compliance pressures there, but we still come across businesses who are saying, well, we can't do this sustainability project because we're going to invest that budget in a new machinery or in something else that's not necessarily directly related to sustainability. So is there a danger there that businesses are just missing a trick in terms of getting ahead of that curve from seeing sustainability as a competitive edge?
Yes.
In a nutshell.
Yeah. In a nutshell, yes. I think that the typical mindset has certainly shifted in the last 3-4 years, since ESOS phase 2, and with obviously all the world events in between. But yes, we do still see that. I think certain sectors, and I'm not going to name them, seem to be certainly far more open, and they view, sustainability, energy efficiency, and obviously the net zero journey as a competitive advantage and not just the right thing to do and the thing that they have to do. Whereas other sectors will make the right noises, but in reality don't see the benefit of investing, even though you can demonstrate sometimes significant improvements to the bottom line. With some organizations, ESOS is focused around really scope 1 and 2. Some organizations that might be less than 2% of their overall footprint once they've measured scope 3 as well. So you do get that mindset from the top that says, well, what's the point?
Yeah.
It's all down to our supply chain, our value chain. It is, but everything's about marginal gain. Net zero is not an overnight thing. We're all on this journey. It's a longer term target that organizations have. But if you can control that 1 and 2%, you should. That's simple. Yeah. And so again, it's our role to educate them, and I think come at it from a commercial perspective, which is what I enjoy doing. I like helping our stakeholders present to the board to demonstrate that these things, sometimes ignore them as carbon reduction or energy efficiency. This is just the right thing to do from an operational excellence perspective. This is sustainability in its truest sense in terms of just efficiency of resource within your business. But that can be an uphill struggle at times for some clients.
We've kind of not wanting to go into the scope 1, 2, and 3 section of it too much. No, not at all. But not to touch on the scope 3 too much. But I've been in situations where I've been working with businesses and making some great progress on on-site generation projects, and then they've had their footprint measured and realised, in comparison to their scope 3, what a small percentage scope 1 and 2 makes up, and that has actually halted the work we've been doing. With that same client, in the same time I've been working with them, they have lost one of their largest clients because their scope 1 and 2, it makes up the scope 3 of their client, who signed up to very stringent targets, and they then went straight to their supply chain. So to John's point, this is what we can manage and we understand a lot more right now. The more you start to measure your scope 3, the more you start to report on your scope 3, and the deeper you delve into it, the bigger the project's going to get, the bigger the size of it's going to get, and the harder it's going to be to actually solve. So there are going to be cost elements associated with that reporting, with that auditing, and with that change. So why not make as much financial savings as possible in the part you can control, combined with making those reductions in the scopes that we actually understand a lot more about at the moment? Because as we're starting to see, the scope 3 element is becoming a bit of a moving target. It's how we're reporting and the metrics we're using to measure it are changing almost daily. So we may as well be looking at all these 3 things at the same time. And that touches on the same point as measuring kind of your large savings initiatives from a carbon perspective versus your small ones, so your wind turbine versus your LED lighting system, but also your long term versus your near term, so your voltage optimization against your solar PV. And you just need to have that understanding of all your scopes, all of your initiatives and everything all the time. But remember that that changes as the energy market changes, that changes as the reporting metrics change. So it's about revisiting it and always trying to use dynamic data and always be looking at everything today, not thinking too much about tomorrow. Work it out, but think about the tomorrow while you're looking at what you can do right now. Otherwise, we're all just going to end up kind of spinning around in circles and not doing anything. Yeah,
that's a really good point, actually, because the danger is if you look at it too broadly, you rabbit in headlights is just, gosh, where do I start? There's too much and I can't influence this. Actually, no, you can. It's marginal gains, it's momentum, it's taking action. Bringing that back then practically to the ESOS action plans, What is some of your kind of advice for businesses in terms of, right, there's a deadline coming up for the ESOS action plan submission, but it's an opportunity to either, start your journey, maintain momentum. What sort of advice have you got for businesses who are looking to, create that action plan, but who actually want to take action and implement it? Where do they start? What do they need to do? How would you advise they go about it?
I think there's a few key things there that they have to get senior leadership buy-in very much, and make it clear to them the implications of the action plan, and get that filtered down throughout the organization. I think having something that's genuinely robust as well, you've got some firm quotes, you've got some firm figures in there. Don't say indicatively we're going to throw solar PV across 6 of our sites without really knowing what does that look like from a cost perspective. Is that going to be manageable? So there is time, obviously, you need to do, in some cases, more of a deep dive than an ESOS report might have given you at high level, just to ensure that the figures are going to work for the organisation.
I mean, touching on the senior leadership piece as well, that's the most important part of it, because that's the person that has the sign-off, and that's the person that can authorise the finances and the capex for these projects. But also, there's an element to, this is everybody's number, this is everybody's mission, so it's getting it to trickle down as well and build a culture out. We work with a lot of manufacturers where a lot of the potential really quick wins and energy savings opportunities within businesses come down to just shift patterns and how you're operating with regards to turning lights on and off and making sure that machines aren't being left on when they're not being in use. We've had situations where we've installed monitoring and targeting technologies and sensors, and we've looked at the shift patterns, and we've seen that kind of everything's been turned on at 7 in the morning, but shifts don't start till 9 in the morning, and nothing's been turned off between that. Now, these don't look like huge numbers when you look at it on a daily basis, but when you then multiply that across a portfolio, and then you multiply that across an entire year, these things start to stack up, and businesses will simultaneously not be changing those things, but then sitting there telling me that the things that I'm putting in front of them are too expensive. So it's just about building the culture out that there are a lot of things that you can do within the business that are going to cost you nothing, and they're going to make a small saving in comparison to other things that you could be doing. However, it's a start, and either you do it now and get it out the way, or you spend £800,000 on a solar PV project and still end up having to do all these small things in 25 years' time. So it's just about being smart about it. Think about what you can do that's maybe low cost but quick payoff. Investing in maybe less expensive technologies that start to see savings straight away. Kind of looping back to monitoring and targeting technologies. Yes, there is a saving associated with making changes from what you see in the data, but a lot of the importance of having that data comes with your ability to report on the things that you're doing going forwards. It's really good from a company culture perspective and also from a reporting perspective to be able to tangibly show this is what my energy footprint or this is what my energy profile looked like today. I invested in this technology. This is what it looked like here. This is my costs going down, but this is the savings starting to come up over the next few years thereafter. And being able to show that's going to make life a lot easier in the long run, but also is going to help you secure better investments for future projects because you actually have data to show rather than saying, here's our energy bill, it's this much less, but it doesn't take into account a lot of the small things that happen on site. So there's a really huge piece in data quality at the moment, and we'll definitely within the Scope 3 reporting piece, a lot of what comes out of it is data quality and improving data quality exponentially as you move forwards through this journey.
And I think getting that bow wave of buy-in, as I like to describe it, some small wins, but demonstrate through data, we've saved 3%, we've saved 4%, that's 4,000 on our bottom line, that's 40,000 on our bottom line that's going to extrapolate out to. And again, going back to what we're saying about the combination of measures as well. There's no point saying in year one of my action plan, we're going to install a heat pump when it's been identified within your ESOS reports that the first thing you need to do is some pipe lagging, improve your windows, improve the insulation in the property, which means you can then have a more efficient building and you put in a smaller heat pump than if you put in the heat pump from the outset. So again, it goes back to they have that, if you like, the ideal list of all the opportunities there, but it's making sure that the organisation's put in the right order that's realistic. Otherwise, it can undo all the good work they can lose some of the efficiencies that are
Yeah.
potentially existing for them.
That goes back to your earlier point about the holistic view, and that's so important, taking that kind of broader view, because actually if you just look at it individually, you would probably make some wrong decisions and some false economies.
Yep.
And therefore, take that kind of broader view, get some advice on, actually consider this, consider that, pull it all together.
And I think this is where the organisations still need support through the action plans. This is obviously the first time for many of them that they've done anything like this. Some of them have, very detailed already 10-year decarbonisation plans. For some organisations, they've never pulled together anything resembling an ESOS action plan or a net zero action plan. So it's ensuring that they have enough support and are comfortable so they don't make the wrong decisions, as you rightly say, Rob.
And going back to your point around data, but also kind of taking action, I think what we see is, when businesses see, gosh, this is a cost, this is quite a big outlay. By taking action now, banking some of those savings, yes, it's 3%, 2%, but actually you can bank those savings, and then in a year's time, those savings can be used to offset the cost of the larger initiatives. So it's not always about choosing the biggest initiative or just doing small things.
Exactly.
It's getting that combination.
Yeah, exactly. And also that if you do follow the kind of advice of setting a budget that you have available, that budget isn't necessarily coming from the savings made elsewhere, but that budget will go a lot further if you can add in some savings that have been made through initiatives that you've done, which were maybe cheaper in the short term. I think also kind of touching on the point of businesses often having people who didn't have a sustainability background, and maybe this wasn't their role necessarily, and now they've been tasked with this. A lot of why we do what we do and why we can keep showing up every day, even though it's quite a challenging task what we're doing, is the passion. We are very passionate about the message that we're trying to deliver and the goal that we're trying to achieve as a planet. And I think that businesses can also take that and harness that passion. There will be somebody within every single business who shares that passion and wants to make that difference, especially within the place that they work. So it's also about not just putting maybe your operations lead as that role because they deal with every single department, but find yourself a sustainability champion within your business, somebody who really is passionate about this. Because I was at a conference a few weeks ago, and there was a chain of schools, a group of schools, and they have a sustainability champion who manages the sustainability across every single school within that group. Now, that is their role. Obviously, it's blue sky thinking to an extent because that's what they've been brought in to do, and so they can spend all day doing it. But because they are speaking to every single department within every single school within the group, and the parents and the students, they are the go-to person that understands everything that's going on, so can start to try different things in different areas and then report on successes and then try things that worked in one place somewhere else. But it comes to that point of sustainability has to be interlaced into every single part of what you're doing as a business, and that's how you're able to unlock those things that don't cost a lot of money, is if you really know everything that's going on everywhere and how we can optimize that. And it comes back to kind of having the data available, looking at everything all at the same time, having somebody that's passionate about it, and all collaborating on how we're going to go about this.
And Otto, talk to me a little bit about the true crew and the true platform, and how businesses can leverage those solutions.
Absolutely. So the True platform, and what's really exciting about it, especially from a sustainability standpoint, and to tie to ESOS with it being energy savings opportunities, is that 50% of the platform is actually just based around energy procurement and the energy market itself. When we look at sustainability initiatives, they are instantly outdated from the second you actually produce that feasibility study of sorts. I use solar as an example, it's just an easy one to talk through. But your solar savings of deploying a solar array are based on what you're not purchasing from grid. Now, if you're on a fixed tariff, for the term of that fixed tariff, it's going to be more or less the same because you're paying the same amount for the whole term of that contract. If you're on a flexible tariff, the rate you're paying for energy from grid is constantly changing. So you wouldn't use a metric that's static in order to compare your savings against something that's dynamic. So what True does is it takes your sustainability project and it overlays it with live energy data. So we've seen in the past couple of years some really crazy movements in the energy market. And what True allows you to do is look at your proposal, no matter what's going on around the world, and it will always show you how that project is going to deliver from a cost and carbon saving perspective to date live with what's going on in the world around you. And what that means is it allows you to be a lot more dynamic with the conversations you're having and conduct things like scenario testing. So we can go to stakeholders and say, if we deploy this project now, this is what the saving is going to look like from a financial perspective. If we don't deploy this project for another 6 to 12 months, this is exactly what it will look like based on the energy market today. And also retrospectively, okay, we didn't act on this. This is what we could have saved. This is now what it's going to look like. And it's just about showing people all of those different scenarios to allow them to see how quickly we have to be reactive to changes in order to know the best time to act, but also what the best things are to act on at any one point. When you combine that all together, we can then build out full strategies where we're doing that exact same thing, but across 10 different initiatives and across 10 different technologies over 10 different years. And it's that, tying back to the point we were saying earlier about looking at everything at the same time, that allows businesses to have a better understanding of their net zero strategy, the cost incurred of it, and whether they're going to hit kind of some of these action plan points that they're going to be reporting on. With regards to True Crew, we are very aware that that all sounds fantastic, but then when you actually set out to go do it, it's not exactly the easiest thing, and it is quite daunting. We love it, and so what we try to do with True Crew is we act as an extension of your team. And to John's point earlier, we sit on the side of the client, we don't sit on the side of the suppliers. You've got to be unbiased when you're approaching net zero, because it's not a one size fits all. Not every solution works for every single business. So what we do is we conduct a workshop with an individual business and identify budgets that they might have available, targets that they've set, what they actually do on site, and we will help them build a dynamic net zero strategy that works within those budgets. And we show them that cash flow. How much are they going to need over the next 10 years? What are they going to work to? We can then model that against the targets that they've set, so that before they spend any money, we can say to them, this is how much it's going to cost, this is how much carbon you're going to save, this is how much money you're going to save, and by this date, based on current market data, you will hit this. But then tying it back to the dynamic side of things, the second you're not going to hit that due to maybe changes geopolitically or something, we can see that straight away, and we can advise them on that. And then we can project manage the delivery of that strategy for a business so that they aren't so resource poor, which a lot of them find themselves in the position of being.
Brilliant.
It helps bring it to life.
Exactly.
I think, and that's the key thing. And as Otto says, for me, and obviously we've worked on a few mutual clients together and brought the True platform to them. It's helped bring our ESOS reports to life for the client, but also help them build that business case. And it sort of preempts many of the questions that the CFO is ultimately going to have around the financial metrics, which speeds up the process, gets greater buy-in.
Exactly.
There's not so much doubt around about the project being presented upwards for sign off, because a lot of it is there, the information's there, and that's really powerful, and that's really effective for the clients.
Yeah, and what we see from the Planet Mark side as well, as you alluded to earlier, is that collaboration amongst members. It's kind of connecting people across different sectors who might not necessarily be speaking to each other in their own industries, and that's pretty key. But also having that baseline of data from the carbon reporting that you're doing for them gives them the kind of base point to start from, and then they can track the progress through True. Question for you both then, in terms of just looking ahead, and a business that might be listening in thinking, okay, well, what would be the key advice you'd give to any business who's either really starting on that kind of sustainability journey or trying to build a bit of momentum through ESOS? What would be the kind of key bit of advice you'd give them?
I think for any businesses that perhaps haven't hit ESOS thresholds and haven't gone through that exercise, for me, getting in and getting some detailed energy audits, boots on the ground, assessing a building, getting under the skin of it, getting into plant rooms, looking at the BMS system, looking at the data, analysing the half-hourly data to see what the spikes are, the trends, the anomalies. Why do you have a spike at 4 a.m. on a Thursday on your energy? You've clearly got conflicting heating and cooling happening every Friday due to the energy patterns. And organisations rarely do that unless they've had to, for the ESOS, for example. So I think having that level of granularity as a starting point is great. And then, it's working with the likes of True, it's working with good technology partners to build out that plan. Don't rush it. You obviously want to implement change as quickly as you can, but equally you want to make sure you're getting detailed, accurate quotes in. You want to be working with good partners. And you also want to understand your wider business strategy. if you do have decisions about our leases up for renewal in 26, is it likely to continue? Yes, it is. We're probably going to take another 10-year term. Fine. That then changes the dynamic of what you're looking at, where that tipping point for return on investment figures is for you to think those three measures are going to go into our action plan, or actually they're not. We're going to park them because we're probably going to be building a new, a new operations centre in 2027. So I think it's important to get granular detail, and Otto's point about monitoring and metering is so important. That's very often a recommendation within our ESOS reports for clients. They have still quite poor data in many cases, and it's easier to implement where you have control of your own building. It's still, a lot of the tenant landlord dynamics create challenges for extracting data. But even then, we're seeing more and more tenants moving into new buildings insisting upon, their own metering, their own granularity of data, so that they aren't paying for energy that they're not necessarily consuming, but also they've got greater control. And when they do implement change, they can map out that benefit and quantify it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that to add to John's point with regards to especially the work that Planet Mark do, businesses shouldn't always think that to measure your footprint or to do that first stage there's only one product on the market, and there's only one thing that you can get done, and it's going to cost you hundreds of thousands of pounds, and you're going to do a deep dive audit that's going to take a year, and you're going to cover everything. It can be very much chopped up, and you can do it as a first step, and it doesn't have to be everything. So if you are in a position as a business where maybe you don't have the capital around right now, or you're not planning on actually making use of the findings of a very, very detailed audit, speak to them and start to think about what you do want to do, and they will work very closely with you to identify what the remit of works is, so that you're only getting data that you actually need right now. You can then go and add to it, and frankly, if you went and added to it in 3 years' time, how they go about it in 3 years' time might actually be different to how we're doing it now. So doing it all now, spending all that money on it now, only using a third of it, and then by the time you get to this final piece, probably having to get it redone anyway, you may as well work out what the constraints are of what you're trying to achieve, and then speak to consultants like Planet Mark about it and actually understand what the remit of works is before you then start to build out your plan thereafter.
Got you. One of the topics I'd like to discuss a little bit is just around financing and sustainability. So we discussed the idea of making savings, identifying the kind of early wins in sustainability. But one of the pitfalls we tend to see is businesses have silos between their energy procurement teams and their sustainability teams. And the issue there is that they're just they're working on energy, but they're working in completely different areas. So for example, you might have a procurement team who are forecasting consumption for the next 3 years, signing up to contracts for 3 years with a 5% buffer, whereas in a different department you have sustainability teams who are looking to reduce consumption by 20, 30, 40% year on year. And therefore there's a real kind of issue there of them not speaking to each other. So talk to me a little bit about where you see this working very well in terms of that communication between the two and the importance of getting procurement and sustainability working together.
Yeah, absolutely. It comes very much down to how we enter into a business when we're working with them as well, especially when they're signing up to things like True Crew, because we are a single point of contact that gives them access to their whole strategy and all of the suppliers that they're working with and all of the initiatives that they're exploring. The idea is we don't want to speak to one person. It's a waste of time, because that person isn't going to be the person who is actually having to be on site when the suppliers come in to conduct site surveys, and isn't going to be the same person who authorizes the capex or authorizes the project or is going to be reporting on the benefits of it. A lot of the time those are 4 different people. So what we try to do is we are that central point of contact, but everybody who's going to be involved in this journey needs to be there together, because how we are going to act on one thing could completely affect how another department's going to operate. And we find that actually with Open Energy Market and True anyway. One of the things that's really useful and really puts us in a great position when we're working with businesses is a lot of the customers that I work with to do net zero initiatives, we are managing their energy procurement contracts as well. So what it means is if we are going to deploy a megawatt solar array that's going to significantly reduce how much their annual volume is going to be purchased from grid, our procurement team can have that information and can have that forecasted new volume as early as we have it. So it means that they can start to prepare for any renewals, or if they're having to sell back any power, or if they're going to have to buy differently, or if they're going to even change the way their contract is going to be set up based on that new way of looking at things. So businesses can take that kind of same setup and they can take it into their own business, even if we're not managing their energy contracts, because if there is a team that is looking at X initiative that's going to change their volume by Y, the people who are dealing with it, or anyone that has anything to do with it, needs to be aware of that information. And it comes down to the communication piece, really.
Yeah, and we do see that in terms of the actual procurement strategies. It's using your procurement strategies wisely and leveraging, for example, the trading teams in open energy market, where we can't beat the market by 20, 30, 40%. But what we're seeing the smarter business doing is taking those savings, banking those and reinvesting those in the sustainability strategy. So it's looking beyond just the sustainability initiatives and looking at the broader procurement strategy, leveraging that to kind of drive investment. Funding of sustainability beyond using savings from procurement, then there's plenty of other options out there now. It's not just a big capital outlay. So we have got power purchase agreements. Can you just touch on those and how they work and the benefits of those for clients?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in very simple terms, kind of power purchase agreement is a great way of avoiding initial capital outlays on larger projects. Essentially, it's a long-term contract that you would enter into with an investor. So if we had, for example, a solar project, an investor would cover the cost of the delivery and install and operation and maintenance of that project. And in return, you would purchase the energy that system produces for a fixed term at a fixed rate, or a rate that's fixed, then followed by a fixed inflationary rate. And it can be very flexible as to how we set these things up. If you wanted to, for example, have a 10-year PPA fixed for the 10 years, you could, but then you've got to take into account kind of what the energy market's going to look like, so that you're always at least purchasing the energy that's produced at a lower rate than you would be buying from grid. Otherwise, it defeats a lot of the point of investing in the project. So it's important to have those conversations with a consultant or with the supplier that's delivering your project to understand what the market's going to look like going forwards, and therefore how I want to set my PPA up in order to make sure that I'm cash positive as a result of it. On the True platform itself, we actually do have forward curves within the trading section of the platform, so that you can, if you are doing this yourself, actually have view and sight of what the energy market's going to look like going forwards in order for you to make that informed decision. But it's also worth speaking with experts and suppliers and consultants about it, because there are a number of other factors that may be not considered just purely surrounding what the cost of power will be, for example. Outside of PPAs as well, obviously we've touched on finance lease options and things like that. There has been a distinct lack of finance lease and funding opportunities for SME businesses and smaller scale projects. But it's really positive to see that there are a lot more options coming out now, because they do make up such a large part of industry, and there hasn't really been any support for them so far. And businesses that are large enough to take advantage of a lot of these things already have entire teams of sustainability professionals who can already navigate this expertly. So the ones that need the most support are also not getting that support. So it's really reassuring to see that these options are coming out. We do work with 3 or 4 different finances, third-party finance options for businesses, and it's nice to see that they are starting to kind of support the little people and help, because it's our collective goal, really.
Excellent. So, John, you've been doing ESOS for quite a while now. What are you seeing that's different in phase 3 compared to some of the previous phases? Maybe some of the examples from clients you're working with.
I think one of the major changes I've seen is the whole mentality and mindset around energy and the cost of energy. A lot of organisations now for phase 3 who I've worked with for the past 2 phases were not that bothered by the output, were not going to implement many of the opportunities identified simply because it wasn't going to make much difference to their bottom line. However, this time around, with the energy spikes we've seen, which has caused a lot of pain to many of the major organisations, they are very keen to see the output of those individual site reports, to see those opportunities, to see how it maps out in terms of pounds, in terms of carbon, because they're in a different place from 2019 in terms of their carbon reduction journey. Net zero was not a commonly used phrase in 2019. Most of the organisations we're speaking to didn't have that within their vocabulary then. But for some organizations who maybe hit the ESOS metrics due to staff numbers or only just on the financials, as an example, one organization, their ESOS became their survival plan, if you like. 100-year-old organization in the sort of manufacturing, pottery style sector, shall we say, using huge electric kilns. Their cost of energy was about to quadruple.
Wow.
With relatively tight margins in the current sort of economic climate. That was literally, it was for them, an existential threat, the cost of energy across their two sites. So they were very keen for us to get in, do the audits, explore what could be done there. Managed to identify some efficiencies, but also the mapping out what a big solar PPA could look like for them. They're looking to go ahead with that, and that is going to allow them to continue for hopefully another 100 years. But without that, the conversations we'd had with the CFO, the cost of energy, because they had bought relatively well, but they knew they were about to come off that cliff edge, as so many organisations were, and they knew the shock that they were about to get. That was going to be potentially lights out for the business, literally.
Wow.
So it was great that in that instance we were able to help them find a way forward. As a business that had been running for 100 odd years.
And I think the last few years have shown us that it's not just a nice to have now, it's an absolute must have, and in certain cases it's mission critical, it's business critical.
Definitely. I think the other thing as well is some of the technologies that have been asked or talked about has changed since phase 2.
Yeah.
Heat pumps, everyone is intrigued about them. Do they work? Should I do them? Should I not? I've just invested in new boilers 3 years ago. I've not even begun to sweat that asset. Okay, that's fine, but perhaps there's a hybrid scenario of maintaining that existing infrastructure, but having a high temp heat pump. We're looking at EV charging. Actually, we definitely want on-site generation. We want less grid reliance. The conversations have definitely changed since phase 2 in a positive way. There's a lot of inquisitiveness from organisations wanting to know what they can do to minimise grid reliance and to improve their on-site generation, but also saying we're about to transition our whole fleet to EVs in the next 2 years. We need on-site charging. Can you help us with that? So that major shift has just altered the conversations in a very positive way.
But I think that's one of the dangers, though, isn't it? Where sectors, businesses, individuals can find plenty of excuses. Those excuses could be, well, the political landscape's going to change, therefore we need to wait and see what happens, or legislation's going to change. For example, schools, there's things going on there. There are plenty of potential excuses out there for businesses to say, I can't do anything right now. So what do you say to those businesses that might be, sort of delaying and not really kind of committing?
I think it's maybe helping identify the opportunity cost of not moving forward.
Exactly.
Some of the measures, which again the platform can help identify for them. I think that can, without wanting to instill fear in any clients, I think, well, if you wait a year, let's look at what could that cost you.
Also, I think that we're in a position now where we can model these scenarios. So previously, if someone was sitting there with a 30 tab Excel spreadsheet, they weren't in a position to say, this is going to happen in the upcoming legislation, so this is the scenario we'll model, and we'll just hedge our bets and hope this is the one. Just model both options now, and I don't see why we wouldn't just always have every single scenario. I mean, when it comes to the action plans and how I'm working with businesses, I see a space where when we're reporting in the next phase of ESOS, they will have one strategy that happened before they started, they'll have one strategy showing what happened after they started, and they'll have one strategy showing what's coming in the next year, showing what they've already done. And why wouldn't you just have 3 strategies now? It's so much easier to build them, and we have so much more ability to kind of process data, and we have so much more ability to understand and model, and we have so much more expertise in this space now. Just model everything. Just have all these options available, because when we sit in these boardrooms, and I've sat in hundreds of these rooms with executive boards where we've gone, okay, so we'll set this target, and that's been 2 hours of conversation, and then they've said, oh, well, what if we did this instead of that? And then no one's got the information, so then we wait till next month to come back in and have the same conversation and pick up where we left off. But if we're just modeling everything, and we have a platform, or we're using a strategy that allows us to compare different metrics, different scenarios, different outcomes, then we can get a lot more done in these conversations, because no matter, sustainability aside, getting all of the decision makers in one room in a business in general has always been a challenge, and there's always hundreds of things that are needing to be covered and minutes being taken for left, right and center. So why not streamline these conversations as much as possible with the ability to just prepare for every eventuality? I think if we've learned anything from kind of COVID, not to touch on it, is that you can't predict anything.
Yeah.
And the future is very, very unpredictable. So the only way to do it right is to be prepared for anything. And that just comes with modeling every single scenario, thinking about all your different options, and making sure everybody understands what they're talking about.
Being proactive, stop procrastinating.
Exactly. Let's just get it done.
Yeah, I like it.
Obviously, very easy for me to say, but
yeah,
so the businesses that I find are finding sustainability and decarbonisation the least daunting are the ones that are trying stuff. Not everything goes right, but I think if we look at some of the most successful businesses in industry in general, they're the ones that took a risk, and they're the ones that weren't afraid to be the pioneers, or the ones that weren't afraid to just try something, and if it went wrong, they learn from it. And this is really what we're doing. I think that we don't have the answers, and it's a terrible thing to say, but I don't know what's going to get us to net zero right now today. But what I do know is what is working now and what things are due to happen in the next 5 to 10 years within kind of green tech that may be something that could be of use. Hey, we could sit down here in 5 years' time and I'll say everything I was talking about is complete rubbish. But it's about thinking about what could be happening and what we know and can control right now, and then being dynamic and moving with the times, because times are changing quite a lot at the moment.
Yeah, it's having a proactive mindset about the whole thing. And, you know, a Planet Mark, when we're mapping out a full scope 1, 2, 3 net zero strategy plan, when we're presenting that back to a client, the first thing we say is, this is a live document.
Yep.
This isn't a static document. This is identifying all the things that you could do and should do right now, but it still doesn't have every last nut and bolt to get you down to net zero. No one has the answers, no matter what they say. However, as Otto says, in 5 years' time, there's going to be technology that's probably game-changing, and at that point, that's going to be going into your net zero action plan. And you know, it's not a beautiful smooth curve, people getting down to net zero or decarbonising. It's going to have plateaus, it's going to have ragged edges, it's maybe even going to spike up at times depending on organisations, you know, if they're growing, if there's acquisition, all sorts. So it's acknowledging that it's a mindset to just start doing things, to start implementing things. And that in itself gathers momentum in so much as not just the numbers, but the mindset internally for a business. And I think that's critical. It's the marginal gains. It's just the starting. We'll often go into business, and perhaps I've been into a few schools before where you've had someone on the board of governors has determined that a wind turbine on the shiny new arts centre is the absolute best thing that they should do from a sustainability, from a signposting perspective. A few weeks later, after the energy audit, it's identifying that actually £14,000 worth of pipe lagging is the first thing they should do, and will pay back within 6.5 months. And they should consider that well before looking at wind turbines, and just saying it's not always the cool, sexy, obvious stuff. It's sometimes the smaller stuff behind the scenes, but that's going to give you a tangible effect. You're going to start to see the benefit, and you can start communicating it.
Yeah, there's a great piece in that going straight to a consultant and having somebody build all this stuff for you, that incurs a cost, and that's a cost before you've even started. But all the things that John's just mentioned are things that you, as the owner of your business or your facilities team or your operations team, you understand that stuff probably a lot better than sometimes we understand that stuff, what's actually going on in the machinery on your own site. So get an understanding of your own site first, and maybe model that in a platform, maybe model that on a spreadsheet, whatever you're doing with it. Get a full understanding of what you're doing now and what you could be doing before you even start to look at the stuff you don't know, because businesses have a lot of inherent knowledge themselves that maybe they aren't unlocking because they don't realize it ties to sustainability. We were always looking to make ourselves more efficient. Most businesses I talk to have already done the switch from halogen to LED. That is a shift that we are putting in ESOS reports. So if things like that can be done, that's something you know and you understand and you can implement before you even start to look at these daunting things like wind turbines, and just be proud of all of that knowledge that you've got already before starting to think, oh, I don't know this, so maybe we should just wait, or maybe we should just explore this but not act on it. I think exploring things is probably the biggest failure we're doing at the moment, is that we're looking into stuff and we're discussing stuff and we're considering stuff, but there are so many things that you could just do that will make a difference and make this next task maybe a little bit less daunting.
Love it. So I think if there's one key message coming out of this podcast, it's about taking action, getting started, building momentum, and using ESOS and leveraging the ESOS opportunity to deliver those kind of cost savings and carbon savings. John, Otto, thank you very much for your time today. Appreciate the discussion. Very insightful. Hope you enjoyed the session and look forward to seeing you on our next podcast.
Thanks very
Thanks,
much.
Rob.
Cheers.
Cheers.